Hello, we are group number 30 for MSCI 442, and today we will be presenting why we support the idea that net-centric warfare should be at the center of developed countries' military strategy. Before getting started, we will first explain what net-centric warfare is. Net-centric warfare is the principle of using networking techniques in warfighting. This was first influenced by the world becoming more integrated with the usage and application of information technology in their day-to-day lives. The application in military environment is slightly more difficult, as they must keep their information safe and secure at all times. The principle behind using net-centric warfare is to accelerate engagement cycles. This is often referred to as the Boyd's loop, which was named after John Boyd, a U.S. military strategist. The idea behind Boyd's loop is speeding up the cycle of observation, orientation, decision, action. Speeding this cycle up more and more allows militaries to stay ahead of their opponents. Net-centric warfare also enables warfighters to have more autonomy in their activity. Drones are a prime example of this, who are able to monitor areas without human air operation. There is controversy surrounding the usage of drones, however, with civilian deaths and privacy violations related to drone usage. Now that we know what net-centric warfare is, we will now explain why we think that net-centric warfare should be at the center of developed countries' military strategy. One of the first reasons why we support this idea is that net-centric warfare allows forces to use new tactics that are necessary to fight enemies. Studies have shown that military strength is related to information sharing, access, and speed within all units. With the usage of net-centric warfare, it is possible to fully exploit the highly path-dependent nature of information age warfare. Another reason on why we are for net-centric warfare is that it allows militaries to accomplish more difficult objectives with less resources. This also helps eliminate the length of wars by accomplishing tasks quicker and reduces casualties by decreasing the numbers of required troops on the battlefield. A final reason on why we support net-centric warfare is that it allows developed countries to stay competitive and keep ahead of enemies. It allows countries with high military budget to reduce their spending and provides smaller countries a chance to protect their own interests. One of the main reasons why we support the idea that net-centric warfare should be at the center of developed countries' military strategy is that networked forces allows the usage of new tactics. Power is derived from information sharing, access, and speed, which is increased by network-centric operations. This theory is supported by the results of recent military operations that shows when forces are truly joined and operating according to the principles of NCO, they can fully exploit the highly path-dependent nature of information age warfare. One of the advantages of NCO is that new tactics are developed for networked forces. Networking allows soldiers to track and find each other when they're out of sight. Therefore, they don't need to keep a tight formation. If a force unit is in trouble, one of the units that are nearby can go quickly and help, by swarming to attack the enemy from all directions at once. This tactic was used by the U.S. Army forces during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Benefits of this tactic are: it is harder for an enemy to effectively attack a widely dispersed formation. Combat units can cover much more ground because they do not have to maintain a formation, and knowing the location of all friendly units reduces friendly fire during combat operations. Another example of network forces using new tactics is the U.S. Army's satellite-based FBCB-2 system, also referred to as a Blue Force tracker. This tracker was successfully employed by the U.S. Army, Marine Corps, Special Operations Forces, and British Ground Forces during Operation Iraqi Freedom. The system uses global positioning system transmitters mounted in military vehicles and aircraft to monitor their locations. This information is combined with terrain maps and intelligence on enemy positions to create a battlefield picture that can be shared over commercial satellite networks.
Another advantage of using net-centric warfare is that it allows us to accomplish more with less. John Boyd, a U.S. Air Force strategist, described the sequence of events in military engagement as an observation orientation decision action loop, OODA. First, information is gathered through observing the opponent, followed by orienting the troops appropriately, and then a decision being made by the commanders, and then an action finally being taken. The OODA loop is a fundamental part of warfare and the faster an army can perform it, the easier it is for them to stay ahead of their enemy. With network-centric warfare, information sharing between troops and commanders can happen at a much higher rate in comparison to more traditional means. Ultimately, it speeds up the OODA loop process. Not only can decisions be made quicker on the battlefield, as the time to deliver information is greatly reduced, but also that more control can be exerted by those who are in charge. With an increase in control, the idea of amassing troops and brute forcing fights becomes less influential, and battles can be decided by those who plan and oversee their army the best. What this means for warfare is that less troops will be required to accomplish the same tasks. Proof of this can be seen by reviewing the events of Gulf War, where a greatly reduced number of ground forces and aircrafts were used. This was in part thanks to how quickly information could be transferred. Photos of targets could be taken, sent, and received near instantly via email, as opposed to traditional forms of delivery, which could take multiple days. Network-centric warfare helps eliminate the lengthiness of war by accomplishing tasks quicker than ever before, and also reduces casualties by decreasing the number of troops required on the battlefield. In addition to reducing casualties, net-centric warfare reduces the amount of resources needed in a conflict. Former U.S. Vice President Richard Cheney has stated that with less than half of the ground forces and two-thirds of the military aircraft used 12 years ago in Desert Storm, we have achieved a far more difficult objective. We have near real-time imaging of targets with photos and coordinates transmitted by email to aircraft already in flight. Reducing the financial costs of war has two main benefits. First, it allows countries with a high military budget to reduce their spending and divert their resources to other areas, for example, towards education or healthcare. For the United States, it's estimated that the federal government has spent $4.4 billion on the Iraq, Pakistan, and Afghanistan wars alone. Shifting to a net-centric warfare strategy would allow the government to spend less money on costly wars. Second, it provides smaller countries who typically may not have a large military presence the ability to protect their interests, such as borders. Countries like Canada, for example, do not typically spend a large portion of their GDP on their military. However, Canada has one of the largest borders to protect. Net-centric warfare enables a small amount of units to cover a larger area than using conventional tactics. In conclusion, net-centric warfare should be at the center of developed countries' military strategy because it allows networked forces to use new tactics, since military strength is commonly related to information sharing, information access, and speed. It also helps accomplish more difficult objectives with less resources, which helps eliminate the length of wars by accomplishing tasks quicker, reduces casualties, and the number of troops required on the battlefield. And lastly, it allows developed countries to stay competitive and ahead of their enemies. Countries with high military budget can reduce their spending, while smaller countries have a chance to protect their own interests. Thank you for listening.